It's very useful having the same name as Colin Powell when one is in America and trying to get into a restaurant that's fully booked. And I have tried it a couple of times and it worked perfectly. But that's about the only benefit I've had from the same name. I'm going to start off my talk to you with a direct conversation, and then at some stage I'd like to share my screen and go into my PowerPoint presentation. Do excuse me if at times I get a little bit breathless. It's part of the package that Polio has left me with, and I will instantly recover and come back to you, so no worries. So I'm actually going to start by asking you to please share with me 3 wishes that I have. I wish that I could dance. I wish that I could experience the joint emotions of music and movement together, but I never have, and I never will. I wish I could just run for a bus or jump on a train, not have to plan every journey by public transport as if it's a military operation, to ensure that I have step-free access and also that ramps are provided for my wheelchair as and where required. But again, I never have, and I never will. And thirdly, I'd like to just perform the simple task of bending down and tying up my own shoelaces, not be dependent on my mother when I was a child, or look to my carer for assistance in that simple task. And thirdly, I've never been able to do that, and I never will. And the reason is P-O-L-I-O, polio. What is polio? Well, it's a word we've got very commonly used to in the last 12 months. It's a virus. It's a virus that hits the nerve ends in both the brain and the spinal cord and stops them communicating with our limbs. So if I give an instruction for my right leg to straighten, I can give that instruction until the end of time and nothing will happen because there's just no way of the instruction reaching that particular limb. I was born in the May of 1949, and in November I had a fever. Doctor came and he told my mother, "Don't worry, the baby is teething." Next day, my mother noticed that my legs were lifeless on the cot. She lifted them up and they flopped straight away back onto the mattress. Doctor came back and said, "He's got polio." How does it affect me? Well, I have a high degree of paralysis in both my legs, my feet. My spine is severely curved in 2 places, and now I have respiratory limitations because I have to work with lungs that are only 1/3 the normal size. Doctor told my parents I'd never walk, I'd be a vegetable. And then at 6 months old, my period of hospitalization started. But if I was to tell you that my first day in hospital was 4 years, you'd think I'm crazy. But yes, I was there until I was 4.5. Surgery was done on my feet to try and assist me with getting some mobility in later years. When I'm 6 years old, I'm sent back into hospital for another 12 months. I was put into plaster of Paris from my forehead right the way down to my knees. The forehead was, the plaster of Paris was sewn around my torso and a bracket put either side. Each day, one side of the bracket would be tightened and the other side would be loosened to try and straighten me up during a growth purge. To make my bed, I used to be put on the sideboard, and one evening they were very short of nursing staff and a nurse tried to do it on her own. Coupled with my own weight and the weight of the plaster of Paris, she tripped over a sheet. We both fell to the floor and all the goodness of the surgery was undone. I'm now 8 years old and I'm sent to a hospital in Shropshire on the Welsh border. I'm there for 8 months and that's 200 miles away from home. And the only time I could see my parents was once a week when they made this 400-mile round trip just to see me. But they decided that before I needed surgery, I needed to go on a diet. And they served me up a wonderful, wonderful meal of boiled tripe for main course And for dessert, I had unsweetened blackcurrants. Nothing really to be too attractive or appetizing. So I got the job with a bit of mobility that I had left of being the errand boy for the ward. And I'd go down to the hospital shop in the grounds in order to get the patients that were bedridden their comics, their pop, and their crisps. Next door to the hospital shop was a hospital cafe, and I'd pop in there and have a nice meal of maybe a steak and kidney pudding and mashed potatoes, followed by apple crumble and custard, and no one could understand why I never lost any weight. I'm discharged at the age of 11 and thrown on the scrap heap, saying there's nothing more that they could do for me. Schooling, the local authority decided that I was special needs and that I was sent to a special school where I learnt all the occupational therapy options you could think. So I did painting, I did pottery, I did artwork, I did weaving, anything else than have a brain. My parents could see the frustration on me as there was no academic studies whatsoever, but the local authority would not allow me to go to mainstream school, saying that I was delicate. And the only way that my parents could get me into mainstream education was effectively to move house into a more enlightened educational authority that would give me a chance in my secondary education to go to a normal school. But the real victims are not just the polio child, it's also their parents, because the child knows no difference. I grew up institutionalized, and sadly I realized too late really in life that they were really suffering with comparing my development with their peer group and seeing how my life was restricted by this polio impact. And there was a song at the time called "You Always Hurt the One You Love, the One You Shouldn't Hurt at All." In my teenage and 20s years, I'm full of emotional turmoil. I'm isolated, I'm frustrated. It's like someone looking at life that they so wanted to be part of, but compelled to watch it pass them by through a plate glass window that they could not crack. I'm angry with the world. Then it dawned upon me that no one liked miserable people. So I adopted the closed door syndrome concept. By that I mean I left behind in my bedroom all the problems that I had in my head and went out and met the world each day, greeting the outside world with a smile. But I was so far behind academically during my secondary education that when I left school at 16, I'd accumulated the total amount of one GCE O level, and for some reason I excelled in British Constitution, and I don't know to this day why I did excel in that subject. When my classmates were playing sports, I would be in a library studying a black and yellow book entitled Teach Yourself, and the subject I decided to study was bookkeeping. So my career route after leaving school with this 1 O level was to go to the local technical college and take a further 5 O levels. And as an external student, I gambled on studying and taking the exam of an A level in accounting. And to my amazement and the world's amazement, I got a grade A. So I asked the head of department of the accounting unit, although I wasn't eligible to sit the professional exams, would he let me sit in on lessons for a term, to which he agreed. But at the end of that term, I was guilt-ridden because I was from a poor family and there was no money at home. And I decided it would be unfair to stay into full-time education because if I didn't make the grade, how were my parents going to support me during those years? So I found a job and went to work for £7.50 a week. But I wanted to continue studying, so I found a correspondence course in accountancy with an outfit called the Rapid Results College. And I studied evenings and weekends. It took me 5.5 years, and I managed to qualify with some of God's good grace as a chartered certified accountant. But then I experienced discrimination, obstacles. Barriers were put well in front of me as I didn't fit the city image of a bowler hat and a pinstripe suit. And therefore I just couldn't get the experience I wanted in larger firms to widen my chances of going forward in this career. So I took the other option and gambled on starting my own firm, my chartered certified accountants firm, from scratch. And that was in 1973. And here am I, 48 years, still dabbling. The impact of polio. Well, housing, steps, shower access, height considerations for plugs, light switches, you name it. Everything that we just take for granted, I have to look at in detail with a magnifying glass to make sure that it will work for me. At this stage, I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. Oops. So here am I as a 2-year-old in the Children's Hospital, Great Ormond Street Hospital in London. And if you look very carefully at my legs, you see I'm not actually crawling, but I'm dragging them along with my hands to get mobility. This was the day of the royal visit of Her Majesty the Queen Mother to the ward. And we were all spruced up before breakfast in our best finery clothing in order to greet the royal party. But for breakfast that day, they served up porridge. And I decided the best place for the porridge was to put it over all my golden curly hair. And the nurses got themselves in a panic because they didn't have time to clear me up before the royal visit. So they decided to put me in the airing cupboard and leave me there whilst the royal visit came and went. I was very comfortable. It's very warm and cozy in there. So I had a good old sleep and it didn't bother me. And after the royal visit finalised their attendance, the nurses said, "Where's Colin?" And they remembered that they'd put me in the airing cupboard, by which time the porridge had stuck to my head and they spent the rest part of the day clearing me up and tidying me up from the mess that I'd made. So it shows you may have polio, but you're still a rascal. Got a little video for you. It's very much a result of the war veterans coming back disabled from the Second World War. It became apparent to the government that they needed some form of transportation.
All have motor invalid chairs, and many go out in them every day to work in nearby factories along the Great West Road.
The government came up with designing what we best described in those days as being an invalid carriage. But then they got the brand name, which was the brand name of the manufacturer. They become the Invacar. All were hand controls. In other words, if you take the 3 pedals that are in a normal vehicle, the clutch, the accelerator and the foot brake, they were all incorporated to be only operated by the hands. I'm a victim of polio and have always suffered from restricted mobility. I was 16 when I first got my invalid carriage. The excitement of this vehicle coming into your possession after years of being dependent on, in my case, my parents, to take me anywhere, was an absolute delight and thrill. It gave you the feeling of somehow levelling out the playing field of the limitations put upon you by your disability. It took me to college when I was a student. It took me to my first job. But when we look at it objectively, we can see a lot that wasn't right with it as well.
85% of disabled people using this vehicle are said to have complained about its unpredictable behaviour on the road.
They were not reliable, they were unstable, they were fundamentally unsafe. The fact that it was a single seat, I mean, in your formative teenage and 20s years, it was a very antisocial method of transport because, you know, when you started to form friendships with girls and what have you, I was a bit of a rebel, and I can't say with my hand on my heart that I didn't sneak a young lady in my car on more than one occasion. Well, she'd sit where the wheelchair should sit, on the floor, very uncomfortable, totally no padding, no seatbelt, totally unsafe.
The campaign to get invalids onto 4 wheels instead of 3 switched in October to Tower Bridge.
I did take part in a protest against these vehicles where we were looking for the government to consider issuing a regular adapted ordinary cars. And eventually the protests got so heated that the government allowed this scheme to allow the provision of a regular car adapted for the disabled person.
This Triumph Spitfire is the first sports car to be converted and cost £115 to switch to hand operation.
Most things you find in the disability world, they're never designed by a disabled person. They'll be decided by someone who thinks they know what a disabled person needs. I might be disabled, but I'm a human being. I'm as normal as anyone else. It's just that I have additional challenges in my life, as the mass market for motoring could have easily accommodated them from day one. Well, I managed to get through 2 of these invalid carriages. This was the first one. It was made by a company that could not have had a more apt name. It was made by a company called Frank Tippin. I think the reason they were called Frank Tippins was I was always tipping out of it. Most unsafe and most unstable vehicle you could imagine. Now, if you look at it carefully, you see the wonderful aerodynamic lines that it has. But you also notice that it's a coupe. Now, you may think the coupe design was to make sure that I got a suntan during the summer months. Well, it wasn't really for that purpose. It was to basically keep me alive, because the engine was attached to an exhaust manifold by a massive bolt, and the machine vibrated so much that this bolt was forever becoming undone. So in order to keep alive, whether it was night, day, rain, snow, wet or dry, I had to drive around with the soft top down in order that the carbon monoxide fumes would not have killed me and avoided me coming here to talk to you this evening. My first one tipped over into Trafalgar Square in a damp day, and a policeman came along. He uprighted it and I went off on my way. They gave me a replacement one, which was in the video, that design, and I was coming back from at the coast near Gatwick Airport, and I could smell fumes. So I was pretty smart. I thought I'd better go out of it before it burns on me. And I did that, and a motorist behind stopped and got out a fire extinguisher and said, "Do you need help putting out the flames?" And I said, "No." I said, "Please just let it burn, because I never want to get back in one of these ever again." And that was the end of me driving those single-seater vehicles. But what you might be interested in was the day of my driving test, because being a single-seater, the examiner can't, like normal test days, get in the vehicle next to you. So I arrived at the test centre and met the examiner, and he said, "I will monitor you going around a block of roads to see your driving conduct." He says, "And with this clipboard, when I wish you to do an emergency stop, I will drop the clipboard." So I diligently went around this square of roads, and every time I turned the corner and could see him up ahead in his long rain Macintosh, I behaved myself. Did it 2 or 3 times. I thought, oh, must be the next time round he's going to ask me to do an emergency stop. So I got to the corner, did a left, went round the corner, and to my horror and amazement, he's lying flat out in the road in front of me. And it appeared he'd got out and went in front of another invalid carriage, and that guy knocked him over. But they were so floppy and whatever, it didn't do him any harm. The other interesting thing is I nearly got done for speeding in one of these, because I discovered that if I'm on the downside of a flyover and the wind is behind me, I could get 63 out of it. And what I didn't notice was up coming next to me was a police car. And this policeman and his companion were laughing their heads off, thinking, how the hell can he get 63 out of this? And I think they were just too embarrassed to stop me and give me a ticket. So he wagged his finger as if to say, slow down and don't do it again. And that way I learnt my lesson and behaved myself forevermore. And when my first job, they delegated me every Friday to go to the bank and get the cash for the wages of the staff. Now, you know, if anyone would have wanted to knock me out and take the money, all they had to do was a large puff, and I've been flat on the floor. So I don't think Securicor had any competition or worries about losing a job with me doing that. Obviously, my vehicles now have to be all adapted for hand controls. I need a seat riser to elevate me once I'm in the driver's seat, and also now I need a wheelchair hoist to lift my chair in and out of the boot. Mobility is a problem. As I said before, trains and buses are a nightmare. The other impact is my clothing. All my shirts have to be made to measure, likewise jackets, trousers, and even shoes. But life goes on, and it did for me. But there you go. Where do I finish up? I finish up in court. Thankfully on the right side, because in 1987, I was appointed a Justice of the Peace and I sat in court as a magistrate, mainly with doing adult chairmanship crime for 32 years. In May of 2019, I'd sadly reached the mandatory retirement age and had to retire, but I'm still involved with the court on a project called MIC, Magistrates in the Community, where I visit schools to teach children the impact of all crimes upon victims, society, but most importantly amongst themselves. Before I was made a JP and I'd be talking to a group in an audience, I used to say, it's nice to see so many familiar faces, but I no longer say that in case I come in contact with someone that I may have met in my professional role. I joined Radlett Rotary Club in 2009, and after giving my job talk, was immediately invited to talk at district conferences, RIBA Foundation and Paul Harris events. I'm precluded from visiting many clubs prior to lockdown, which lacked accessible toilets and had steps. So I suppose I describe my life as the tortoise and the hare. It takes me time, but I get there in the end. This is a picture of my wife, Anne, who I married in the year 2000. On that day, instantly acquired 2 stepchildren, and four grandchildren came along during the time that we were together. But sadly, there is no happy ending, as I lost her 3 years ago to cancer within 3 months of it being diagnosed. So I now live alone, totally isolated by my disabilities, but supported and dependent on my carer companion. When my first grandchild arrived some 25 years ago, my wife and I were advised to have the polio vaccine because we could come into contact with the live polio virus through the contents of his nappy. So we went along to our GP and he gave me a sugar lump on which he put a few droplets of the vaccine. I swallowed it, went home, and for several weeks thereafter, I was a psychological mess, thinking how different my life would have been had the polio vaccine been available to me when I was a child, but I was just born too early for that. During our lifetime together, Anne and I travelled extensively around the globe. When flying for over an hour, I have to order and am sometimes charged by the airline for the provision of in-flight oxygen, and that's come up to €500 for a return flight. I was involved with the 2012 Olympics as a volunteer games maker. Polio medical resources are extremely limited. There's only a few centres of excellence now to look after us in our latter years because the medical profession don't see it during their training years anymore. The new generation just have no experience of it whatsoever. So now I'm going through the aging process. In addition to high blood pressure, high cholesterol, osteoporosis, and old men's problems, I've also got PPS, post-polio syndrome. And the best way I could describe it is I've exploited in active years the parts of my body that work, and they've now started to fail prematurely. I've got breathing deterioration, fatigue, pain, and further mobility limitations. There's been significant changes in my condition since 2010, with the impact of a chest infection that hospitalised me. I was discharged on that occasion and became oxygen dependent for a while for 15 hours a day. I've been blue lighted twice back into hospital during this last decade with pneumonia and a collapsed lung. This is when we were at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and there they had a wheelchair accessible coach to make it easier for me to see all the sights. Here is Anne and I on our final holiday together in Panama City, enjoying the views of a tropical rainforest. I think, you know, if you want to do something bad enough, you find a way. Every night I'm hooked up to this machine, which is called a VPAP machine, in order that I can expel the carbon dioxide that my body cannot do naturally. And I have to use it for a minimum of hours each and every night, 8 hours. Post-polio syndrome sufferers are estimated to number 120,000 in the UK, 4 million in the USA, and millions more worldwide. A few mottos: the future, there is today. It's been a very hard life, but as I've only one visit to this planet, I'm determined to enjoy it and fulfill my time here. Here's a picture of me on the VPAP at night. And here am I at a local school telling them more about polio. And we planted on a project at that time called the Seeds of Hope, which was to give them flowers to actually see and reflect upon the impact of getting polio. This is a district conference that I spoke to in Newquay one year. And as you can see, we're all doing this finger pinch there of nearly there. Well, we're not there yet, folks, and we still have to work hard to make it work. I'm here at the Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Hertfordshire, planting purple crocuses on a World Polio Day a couple of years ago. Another video for you.
What happened to me changed my life forever.
As a baby, my father took me to the swimming pool, not knowing the impact that one visit would have on my life. 2 days later, I had a fever and I couldn't move my legs.
Infantile paralysis, they called it then.
At school, I saw other children being vaccinated, but for me, it was already too late.
Immunisation was only a sugar lump away, but I missed out.
I look back and think, why should any child today have to suffer like I did?
Polio is just as cruel now as it was then.
The difference is, today we can do more than just prevent it. We can end it.
Stand with me and sign our petition.
Make sure our government keeps its promise to wipe out polio once and for all.
Polio changed our lives forever.
Right now, we can help change the lives of countless others for the better. So the fight goes on. Here's a picture I'd like you to see and tell me if you can recognise who's in it. Do you all recognise the guy?
Colin Powell.
Well, I'm really pleased you said that, because it normally is the other guy sitting opposite me. But I did have the pleasure to meet Bill Gates a couple of years ago at a conference in London, and cheekily asked him, could I have a photograph taken with him for my Rotary and charity work, to which he readily agreed. So at the end of his presentation, I was taken into his private room at the back of the theatre, and we had a chat, and he came to taking the photograph. But Bill Gates is a hell of a lot taller than me. So he said, do you mind if I kneel to be level with you while we have the photograph taken? So I think I'm the only person on planet Earth can have the reputation that I brought Bill Gates to his knees. So it's something to reflect upon. But what was really nice is that after this, when the photograph arrived, he sent a message which I find so touching. And basically, he just basically said in the final paragraph, thank you for your advocacy for polio eradication. And that means a hell of a lot to me. Here am I with my local MP, Oliver Dowden, who's now the Culture Secretary in Whitehall. And basically, I was trying to muster his support and coupled with his parliamentary colleagues, because we're not only looking for the polio projects in the UK, but via Rotary, we're also looking to ensure we get support from governments to give us money to get the polio vaccine globally put in with medical support to perform the task. And I'll tell you a little bit more with the success of the petition and my MP connections very shortly. And here am I actually in the Houses of Parliament in one of the committee rooms with the project was called Countdown to Worldwide Polio Eradication. And this was held in conjunction with UNICEF, the World Health Organization, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And here am I in they changed the name of it. It used to be called the Department for International Development, but now it's part of the Foreign Office, presenting this petition with over 27,000 signatures on it to get the government to give us money for international vaccines. And this was in July of 19, and November last year, we actually got notification that the government had awarded £400 million for this project over the next 5 years. So it does show that people power on occasions does work. Very proud of that. And as was mentioned, I was also honoured by my club last year with the Paul Harris Fellowship. And I got another couple of awards last year, which I'm not showing you to brag about, but it's just the fact that I tirelessly do what I do. And when you occasionally get the recognition for it, it just means so much to me. In 2017, RIBI appointed me a Purple for Polio ambassador, but the year before, the British Polio Fellowship appointed me their Rotary Liaison Ambassador with a mission to reach out to all fellows. So basically, what I try and do is share my energies. I never ever want to delineate from the project that we have in Rotary to end polio now. I don't want anyone to live the life that I've had, but I also ask you, please, fellows, to remember that in towns and villages throughout the UK, we have polio survivors. And I do really feel that we need to give some recognition within Rotary for their needs in their final years. And here again, I'm awarded by Rotary RIBI an award for being a person of action. But what really got to my heartstrings was the secret presentation that they arranged for this. And it was done by Mark Maloney, last year's Rotary International president that lives somewhere in Alabama, USA. And he did it on a fleeting visit just before lockdown to the UK. And we'll see that shortly. Here's Mark. And this should be a video.
And it is my pleasure tonight to rectify that situation. And it is my pleasure to recognize as a People of Action polio advocate with the award for outstanding contribution to Rotary's efforts to eradicate polio from the Rotary Club of Radlett Rotarian Colin Powell. Don't shake hands anymore. And so we got to wait for the official photographer to get here. There's others coming, so I'm going to stand here for a few minutes. Keep smiling. Yes. Yes. Yep. Tony, pull in here behind. Well, come in on the other side.
From our village. Yes.
Now, Colin, perhaps you'd like to, I don't know whether it's Colin or Colin. In the U.S., it's Colin Powell. Remember our former Secretary of State? Anyway, do you have anything that you'd like to say this evening?
I do. Thank you, Mr. President, first of all, for the award. I'm extremely humbled to accept it, but my job is not yet done because we still have polio in this world, and we have children being born and not getting the vaccination in order to eradicate their life with this wretched disease. A disease that I contracted when I was 6 months old. I'm now in my 71st year and I'm still suffering. How do you suffer? Well, first of all, the pain of having your body totally messed up, with the muscles not working, with me respiratory problems, with me spinal problems. Half my rib cage is in my spine, acting as an internal support. And what do I do it for? Why do I work so hard for it? Because I don't want any child born today to have the battles in life like I've had. Pain, hospitalisation, lack of educational resources, going into adulthood, having social interaction limitations, being discriminated in the workplace, having to struggle just to say even with other people. To Rotarians that have been on this fight for so long, please don't give up. Don't say, I'm fed up with it, I've actually about had enough. Remember, I'm serving a life sentence. I can't go away tonight and forget about it. You can, but I ask you not to. To Rotaract members here today, you're the future. We need your contribution to ensure that we continue this fight to eradicate polio. 200 new cases in the world, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in the first 2 months of this year. That's 200 too many. Please work with Rotary to ensure that we do what we pledged to do, and that was end polio now. Thank you.
And it is.
And then 3 days later, I'm back in the committee room at the Houses of Parliament with Mark Maloney, and he gave me, which I'll always treasure, a presidential year's tie for me to remember that very, very special visit that he made to the UK. Then last year, my district awarded me this service award, and what really touched me was the letter that came with it, which, and this final sentence says, "Thank you for not ever giving up. You have saved countless lives. On their behalf, a huge thanks." And that means a hell of a lot to me. British Polio Fellowship. Well, that's the only organisation that we have that looks after the polio survivors in the UK. 1939, so they're now 84 years or 83 years in existence, and still struggling on with very little resources to look after us. And what do they do with the money that they raise? Well, it's a very, very simple two factors, but they're so important. One is that they provide heating grants for their members living on inadequate state benefit in order that they can supplement the gas and electricity that they need through the cold winter months. And that's such an important gesture that they do. And the second thing that they do is provide holiday grants for not only the polio survivor, but also for their spouse, in order that they can have a week each year away in a hotel where they are given a rest and a change of scenery and can feel a little bit more integrated into society. When I make an appeal for British polio, please understand that within Rotary, I'm not diverting money from the End Polio Now campaign that we all give as clubs to foundation. This money that I would hope that we can put into our minds to assist the charity with comes from the money that you allocate to national charities. And I know that you've been very kind and already given me a donation for them for this talk tonight, but if you can please make a note of them, and when you come to your annual distributions, kindly think of them, I would be very, very grateful. Thank you for that. In better times, they had a lovely head office in Hertfordshire, but and here am I being honoured by Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Gloucester, coupled with my late wife Anne behind me on the opening day. Sadly, that's had to be sold and closed, and they now work on a skeleton staff with 3 full-time members of staff, 2 part-timers and a volunteer in a serviced office. Far less palatial than this building was, but sadly, with so much money being diverted, understandably, to COVID charities, a lot of other small charities have fallen by the wayside, and their existence is now at risk. And as they say, for everyone with PPS, they're there. Why do I care? Well, I care because my life has been a struggle and a challenge, and I just want to make sure that no child born today has to go through a lifetime of experiences like I've had to. It's been a tough life, and I've made it my challenge and my pledge that in my final years, I would devote all my energies to the polio campaign to eradicate it. Colin told me that babies immediately they're born were put into iron lungs to keep them alive. Colin told me that as they grew up into adulthood, they went into larger iron lungs just purely to make sure that they could breathe. But that was their life. They would never left these chambers. Colin told me that around the world, there are children with polio that don't have resources to have a wheelchair. Some have to get their mobility through crutches, and others, as we can see in this graphic, the only mobility they have is to crawl on the ground. Colin told me, I'm so tired, but I will not give up this campaign to eradicate polio from this world. I will fight on until my final breath. Colin told me we need to end polio now. And finally, folks, Colin told me that polio is more than a word. Thank you.